Welcome to the Intrinsic First Leadership Podcast. I'm Aaron Robbins with Intrinsic First. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date on our latest episodes. Ready to dive into the world of leadership? Let's get started. Thanks, everybody, for joining us here at the Intrinsic First Leadership Podcast. We have two special guests here today, Rick and Dennis, and looking forward to talking to them. They work in Hollywood, which is pretty neat, and do graphic design, visualization stuff. And so we're looking forward to talking to them about how they're starting to work and support in the defense industry, which is how we met Rick. Jimmy, I think you actually ran into him at the NIWIC Quarterly Forum and started talking about some of the work that they're doing. And then we kind of bonded over Buffy a little bit when I found out that Rick worked on the show Buffy for a few of the later seasons. So I'm definitely interested in hearing more. And I wore my Sunnydale t-shirt to boot. So to jump into it, I guess, Rick and Dennis, do you mind doing kind of a brief introduction first, and then we'll kind of jump into some of the content?
Sure, I'll get started. My name is Rick Baumgartner. I'm currently working in the live streaming industry in Hollywood. So we do live streaming of game events and sports events. My history has been as a visual effects producer and a post-production supervisor. I've been doing that since about late 1990s. Before that, I was in the gaming industry with Activision as a producer. And Dennis and I first met when Dennis was doing a presentation for the American Institute of Astronautics and Aeronautics, AIAA, here in Los Angeles. And we gave a great presentation on the space economy. And we got to talking afterwards, and we realized we had a common interest in using visualization to explain complex topics to people who maybe weren't expert at on the topic. So we thought about, hey, how could we help not only the sort of aerospace and defense industry, but also how could we help other tech industries innovate faster? So Dennis and I developed a framework called Rapid Collaborative Visualization. We presented it at an AIA conference and also at the recent Space Tech Expo at Long Beach. So that's sort of a genesis of how I got here, and then I'll turn it over to Dennis.
Great, thank you, Rick. My name is Dennis, and I have been in the aerospace and defense industry for probably the better part of 25 years now. I really started off with the Navy doing ballistic missiles, engineering background. Then I moved on to work with NASA on hypersonic vehicles, and I spent a good part of my career with Northrop Grumman doing space. So that's building satellites and various other kinds of space products, including building new factories and stuff. So the last few years, I've been working on my own consulting company. So I've been helping organizations, whether they're private or whether they're government organizations, and helping them with leadership, strategic planning, operations, engineering, technical support, and or even helping them build new facilities if they want to expand or create some new business in another area. One of my key focuses right now has been working with academic institutions such as Cal State Long Beach and UCLA, and helping them kind of build their CubeSats, which are really small satellites. And so it's really proliferating at this point. So I'm really going out there and teaching them how we do things in the space industry, what they should look out for, giving them some management advice. And we're trying to lump all that together with with graphic collaborative visualization that I'm working with Rick on. And Rick's already told you how we kind of met and all this. One of the key points that I was working on at Northrop before I left was I was very instrumental in creating a lot of 3D visualizations that include augmented and virtual reality systems to really help the organization speed up their production. Because nowadays, everybody's always saying we need to get products out faster, we need to get better quality, we need to have better accountability. And so, paper and the way we've been doing things just isn't working. So we have to really look and expand beyond our own industries and really see what other industries are doing and see how we can collaborate, because there's really no need to kind of reinvent the wheel every single time. So that's kind of my background and kind of where we're at right now.
Interesting. Very different backgrounds. Mine very similar to yours, Dennis, although you worked in large companies and I worked in small. But I think, are you a mechanical engineer?
Yes, I am.
By degree? Yeah, so am I. Although you,
oh, fantastic.
Yeah, although you stayed more in the engineering side and I ended up falling into HR about 9 years ago.
Oh, okay. Well, half my career was in senior management, so they don't consider us engineers anymore.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of how I fell into HR. I moved into operations and program management. Very good. Thanks for the backgrounds. That's great. So why don't we talk a little bit about let's start with your past. Let's dive into the Buffy stuff now. Let's just get that over with. So, Rick, can you tell us a little bit about some of the work? I know you've worked on more than Buffy. You've done a lot both in terms of, you said you worked in like video games producing, and then you worked doing visual effects and various things with movies and TV shows. Any, highlights to mention or lessons learned and some of the cool stuff that you worked on?
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about Buffy, and then I'll maybe touch on a couple of the other sort of projects that sort of jump out to me. When I was working at Activision, I got this, after about 2.5 years of working there, I got this amazing opportunity to work as a visual effects producer for the show called Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which I didn't know too much about, but I was brought on. And then about halfway through the show, and from there, I also produced a companion show called Angel.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just a lot of like monsters, portals to other dimensions, people turning into vampires, people turning into dust, explosions, sort of your classic repertoire of television visual effects. What was interesting about the Buffy experience, though, is that our clients, Warner Brothers, would often see something in the movies, like the Lord of the Rings series was going on, and they say, "Oh, we want that. We want Lord of the Rings." And this is like, we may have like $30,000 to do like Lord of the Rings, Lord of the Rings. So it was like the expectations were extremely high. Yeah. But we managed to really do a very good job working with Joss Whedon and his team. And our team, my team and I were honored with an Emmy nomination for the final episode of Buffy,
nice.
Which included digital effects, practical effects, collapsing miniatures, dust particles, all different kinds of practical and digital effects in one show. So that was really my introduction to entertainment, television, and movie visual effects. From there, the couple of the other projects that I've worked on was something called Idiocracy by Mike Judge. I don't know if you've seen that.
We're very familiar. I like that show. It's a little too scary how it might actually happen some days. Some days, it's like, is it happening?
Yeah, in politics, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my team was responsible for creating the mountains of garbage at the beginning that collapse and sort of get the story going, throwing the pod with the main character through a window. So we were shooting on a stage in Van Nuys. We were shooting sort of a miniature garbage mountain, and at high speed, and then we play it back at regular speed so it would look sort of epic. And so that was my contribution to Idiocracy. And then probably the one that is sort of most interesting to me was something around the 2008-2009 timeframe. It was U2 3D. It was the first digital stereoscopic feature film. It just beat out Hannah Montana by like a month. So we managed to get in there.
What was the name of that again? I'm sorry.
There was a show called Hannah Montana.
What was the name of the project, the film that you were doing that for? Was it?
Oh, that was it was called U2 3D.
Got it. Okay.
And it's a concert film by the band U2.
Yep. I saw them at the
and
Sphere
basically
last
we
year.
shot 3D around the world.
Got it.
And mixed it together into like a single virtual concert. So we mixed footage from South America, from Europe, from the US, probably about 8 or 9 different shows over the course of the tour. And we created a single stereoscopic 3D presentation. And although the audio was certainly interesting, it was really like at the time, it was very new tech in terms of capturing events with stereoscopic camera. Now, of course, in major motion pictures, there's a lot of conversion. So they shoot just regularly, and then they have a team of either AI or sometimes humans to create the second eye, so that that's offset, so that it's a stereo image in the theater. So those are sort of the career highlights. And then most recently, I've been getting into live stream production, just because there's not a lot of regular production here in Hollywood currently because of the strikes and the pandemic and AI. And so there's a lot of concerns. It may come back, it may not. But I decided to pivot into live stream production. So most recently, I did I produced graphics for IGN Live, which is a news organization that did a live 3-day sort of news fan event. So what I think all of that brings together, especially the stuff with Buffy and in the movies, is that our teams and leaders in the teams use imagery to convey ideas very quickly and very early in the process. So, for example, when they're developing a look for a scene, they may have a color palette, they may have a storyboard, they may have reference material from other shows that they want to do. They want to get a certain look. But it really, other than the script, they really go really quickly to visuals, so that everybody who may not know the show or who may not know the director or the creative people, they're responding to something visually as opposed to interpreting what a text or what an email kind of description is. So to me, I think the ability to get your team to understand what's happening going forward is a primary sort of responsibility of a leader. And I think leaders in general, maybe especially in the aerospace and defense field, need to use visualization more wisely. And they can borrow a lot from Hollywood in that respect. So that's sort of like my sort of quick take on my background, its relationship to leadership, and my own personal strong interest in visualization, not just as a business, like I like to do it. I also think it's critical to innovation moving forward, to getting to the capabilities that we need to get to, either in a possible conflict with a peer adversary in the future, as they say in the security documents, or just implementing any new system that has to be understood by a lot of different people with a lot of different levels of expertise and experience.
I was thinking, because technology just keeps advancing, and it's advancing faster than ever before. And so being able to explain some of that to a program manager who might not understand the engineering aspects of what's going on in a visualization, I think is incredibly important. And so as a leader of the industry, being able to explain those difficult concepts, in such a way that can be, understood in a very fast manner. If you say a picture's worth 1,000 words, a video is worth, more than that, obviously, but
1,700.
Yeah, sure. But I like where you guys are going. I think you guys are positioned well to really to advance on that, because I work in the program office and we're always talking about visualizations. We're always putting together dashboards with nice little graphs, but on a larger scale, to explain some of these more complex technologies that are happening, whether it's with AI or unmanned vehicles. I mean, to be able to visually put that in front of somebody who has no understanding, but then watching, a visualization of what's going on and what could occur, I think is super important. So my question is, as kind of like the leaders in this technology and observing in the last 2 decades how much it's changed so much. Do you have a method how do you go about trying to figure out what's the best way to tell a story, I guess, with rapidly increasing technological advances, if you will?
Well, in at least the aerospace and defense field, over the last, I would say maybe the last 7 or 8 years, one of the biggest things that's really helped, at least the private industry, is that most of our customers now are realizing that we can't keep doing things the way we've been doing because we're just too slow. They don't have the money anymore and they need things faster. And so what's the way to do it? We have to look at, okay, how do we eliminate paper? How do we get the concept into a person's brain faster, whether they're an engineer, a technician, or a program manager, right? Regardless of what level you are.
Yeah.
And I'll give you some examples. I've been in huge program meetings and people are making hundreds and hundreds of slides of PowerPoint slides. And I've worked on this technically, and I'm sitting in there and I'm getting lost. So I can't even imagine what the customers are thinking, right? Where you're sitting there where you have one page, then you flip to the next page, and it's all supposed to be connected and so on and so forth. It just doesn't work, right? You have to visually understand it, and you have to spatially in your mind try to connect the two hardware pieces together because they're on different pages. And so there's so many things going on in addition to trying to understand the concept that I can see the managers and the customers' eyes either glaze over or they just get frustrated.
Yep.
Right. So this is where, when I had the chance, when I was developing some of these augmented and virtual reality visualization systems, I had some of my team create these basic models of our spacecraft, but it has enough information to portray what the idea was trying to do. So I brought a couple executives, vice presidents in, and we showed them. We put the headset on them, and they can see it on the big screen, and they could walk through the spacecraft. They can explode out the parts. They can point at things. You can touch it, and information shows up. And so they got it within minutes. I mean, faster than they could ever look at it from a PowerPoint slide. And this was so impactful to them. Therefore, people who have worked in the corporate world will realize this rarely ever happens. One of the executives pulled me out to the hallway and goes, "How much money do you need?
Whoa.
Just tell me and we'll go over." And we walked over to his business person and they wrote me out a check to continue development. That's unheard of.
Yeah,
in just a few minutes in the aerospace industry.
That's fantastic. So I guess part of my in that example, like how much prep is that for you? Like how much information do you need to create that? We'll call it a prototype to pitch those executives. I mean, how much work is going on for you guys in that background there?
So that was one of our core things that we had to really be cognizant about, because no one wants to reinvent the wheel of a design. If you spend 700 hours on a CAD creating a design, you don't want to spend another 400 putting it into a visualization system.
Right.
So we worked with a lot of these startup companies and actually some of these larger CAD companies, such as like Pro-E and all these other software companies, where they're starting to create modules in their system that renders whatever you design into a 3D environment that you can use a VR or AR headset with. Some of these others, where I actually brought down a startup company from San Francisco, and they told me that they could actually take a file and render it into a VR environment in less than 3 minutes. So I told them, okay, come down to my office. We went to my conference room. I gave them a hard drive stick, a USB stick. They put it in, and I timed them. They rendered it in 2 minutes and 36 seconds. A pretty large file. We put on the headset, and there it was. Right. So I think, and that was 6 years ago. So I can only imagine what it is now. So I think people realize that you don't want to reinvent the wheel. CAD is already in a 3D environment. We just have to figure out how to marry that 3D environment with all the graphics and everything from the entertainment industry, which is where Rick comes from, right? Where you have a lot of the music, all of the emotion that kind of goes into it, in addition to like the physics engines and all this, so that makes things kind of realistic, so that it's more acceptable to either a program manager or your customer in general.
I just spent 2 days this past week in a 2-day conference, we'll call it, or a meeting. And about 30 or 40 folks were involved, hybrid, so in person and online. And it was like 100 PowerPoint slides. and in those slides were CAD drawings. It was about cabinets and something else, but I could only imagine how much time it would have saved. And even at the end of that, you're still kind of like, okay, what's really the benefit of this project that we're trying to do? Because it was still a little disjointed. And I can only imagine, with that technology you just described, and how much more effective it would be, and how much less time we would, because that's a lot of money, 30, 40 middle managers and senior person sitting there for 2 days. It's quite expensive.
Yeah. Here's another example too. When we're doing proposals, there's a lot of limitations put on us, such as, so many pages, so many paragraphs per section, so many words. So there's a company that actually bypassed all of that. So what did they do? They created their entire proposal in a VR headset and shipped the VR headset to the customer. So they bypassed all of the limitations. Yes.
And they accepted it?
Yeah, they accepted it.
Wow.
Absolutely. I was surprised. But they accepted it, and it bypassed. It had music. It just appealed to senses.
Yeah.
That paper just doesn't allow.
Sure.
Right.
Guys, one of the things that's going through my mind is we have a complex model ourselves that we always wanting to get people to understand because it influences the way the concept is actually taken in. And it sounds to me like, for example, we have an idea that the self is divided into 3 functions: the self that I want to be, the self that I expect, that others expect of me, and the self that I think I really am at a given point in time. And that's an idea that self as a process. Now, just saying those kinds of things, you guys are probably going, well, how would we represent that? What would it look like? And of course, the self is not only a cognitive entity, but it's an affective entity as well. So you've got feelings and cognitions, or just thoughts. Putting that down into some active visual, auditory
representation of
self. Think of self as process. We are not entities that are stagnant. The whole idea, does a leopard change its spots? It's prehistoric thinking in many ways when we start talking about what does it mean the self is process. It means I'm changing. I'm changing constantly. And the idea that not only cellularly that the liver replaces itself every month, the idea that I'm constantly constituting myself as self. And of course, the older you get, the more you get to say, holy mackerel, what does that mean? Because basically the last stage of human development is ego integration versus despair. I mean, we either look at the race we ran and said, did we do a good job or not? And then come to the conclusion that I didn't, would be so different. And the idea that, how do you take an idea or ideas like that, which we believe is fundamental to the way people lead? Guys, you're sitting on the gold mine of ideas, probably, or mechanisms for just what would you do with something like that? So if we walked into your office and said, we got this concept, what would you do?
I think those ideas are probably more intrinsic to the entertainment side than the engineering side. We're very black and white, very logical. And we speak in technical. We hope everybody understands technical, right? Because we've been trained to cut emotion out, right? And that's where I think, Rick and the industry really excels at. And this is where we're coming together to say, hey, how can we marry those two together to get that kind of self and or self-inflection into this technical world, right?
What do you mean by technical world? Could you just say a little bit about that, Dennis?
Yeah, so it's trying to explain your ideas of what you're trying to do, whether it's a hardware, whether it's a concept, whether it's an operation, where we purely look at numbers, we purely look at drawings, but we don't use the other senses to convey our ideas to get it accepted. Right?
You don't.
So when it's not accepted, people automatically go straight into frustration. Right? When there are other ways to convey your ideas, so if you look at movies, right? They've got sound, they've got lighting, they've got all these things, but in engineering, all we've got is a black and white piece of paper, right? And as good as an engineer can explain, which isn't very good to begin with, that's not what we're trained to do, right? We're not trained to influence people. But that's where Rick comes in. Their whole thing is to influence people with all the senses that a human has.
So Rick, what did you just do with what we said? Would you react like Dennis did about what was going through your mind when we were talking about it?
Well, because I think you mentioned it. You were saying that, like, how are you thinking about this as we're talking about this?
Yes.
So from in the Hollywood world, we're very good at representing amorphous concepts. For example, a cyber attack, some kind of intrusion, tracking data, seeing an anomaly. And in movies, that's all sort of visualized and presented. So for Hollywood in general, visualizing abstract concepts is kind of par for the course. We do it all the time, especially when you think about like the Marvel movies or the Star Wars movies. It's like, oh, there's this energy field that no one's ever heard about before. We can talk about it, but how are we going to show it? We can show it. We've Hollywood, or many people in Hollywood, have an experience doing that. So I would say that visualization is definitely for engineering, and it's also for much more amorphous concepts or trends or possibly projections of different policy outcomes. I think Dennis and I both feel that the entire sort of business, government spectrum can benefit from visualization. And just to take a quick step back, I was at the NIWC-PAC industry meeting because I had worked with NIWC-PAC on a show called Sea Strike 2043, which was a 20-year forward look at what warfighting would be like against a peer adversary. And we were taking a look at what hypersonics would look like, what wearables might look like, wearable sensors might look like, human-machine interaction, AI, holographic displays. We were basically taking in an 11-minute internal film, taking a look at what it would look like in 2043. So that was a very recent example, and I think both Jimmy and Aaron have seen that movie. And there we were illustrating really amorphous concepts, like where's the intrusion? How do we tell, like in the sea of this noise of data, what are the things that we need to focus on? And how does an AI or how does a machine help us interpret that? So I wish we could show clips of it, but it's still in limited distro, so we can't.
Right.
But I would say Hollywood is particularly good in showing visually concepts as well as things, and also adding story to it, which in a way, story is the, it's a very human thing. We all have our own stories. We have our past, we have our present, and we have our future. And in a way that we could think about that also as maybe related to the 3-act structure, where there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. So it's not just sort of images of spinning gears and, and stuff, objects. It's sort of that plus adding a story to it. For example, if Dennis and I were working with a new company who has a new way of a new thruster object, we would say we could do like a turntable of the actual object, but what we'd probably also think about is like, okay, how do we show this in the context of a story? Where does it fit into the daily life of the operator or of the command, and what's the story behind it? And if from Sea Strike, there was definitely a story. There were communications were being degraded. There was an enemy approaching. There was it was hitting the fan all at once, and the team working together collaboratively, using various visual techniques, solve the problem and save the day for that particular battle. But there's always many more battles to come. So I think Hollywood is particularly good at representing those kinds of concepts, including extremely personal concepts. I don't know if you remember, like Roy Ames's Powers of 10 animation, where you go from like a close up of a cell out into the universe, and by powers of 10. This is something in the 70s, I think happened. That was a very simple like visualization representation of like the breadth of the universe, the relationship between sizes, all sort of like concepts, but with a story involved in it over a timeline. Yeah. So that would be the answer to my question about what was I thinking about and how would I take on? How would we take on?
Yes.
A topic that would be in your book.
Not to, I don't mean to belabor the point, but if we came back to the idea of the self as process, just a simple statement like that, which is it's not simple, it's complex, but self as process. You and I are beings constantly changing. That concept is going to have to be represented from what I'm hearing you say, with fields and different perspectives that would graphically and probably auditorily be represented in sequence, or at least in motion, that would project the idea that we are constantly changing. I don't want to simplify it, but I think I'm beginning to understand what you guys are engaged in right now.
I think so. And the movie, there's a movie that comes to my mind that talks about like affect, and Hollywood does a really good job portraying different emotions, and Inside Out too. They just came out with their second one where they introduce anxiety, and they actually give it a character.
Yeah, the kids. Yeah, it's a Disneyland.
And that's it's a brilliant movie where, because affect is so hard to actually kind of personify, and they do a really good job. And when you're describing what Hollywood does, I just went straight to that movie. Because it just resonates so much. And I imagine if you were to build a visualization with some of these different, framework, or this framework where you talk about, whether we're using inspiring behavior or not, that could actually be represented by character or by some image that really captures the essence of what's going on there.
Yeah.
And the storytelling is incredibly important, whether you're describing a satellite or an emotion. I think it really helps kind of bring it home. And I think that's where the magic of what you guys are presenting is really kind of hits. That's how I can.
Yeah. One of the key things is also integration. We have to make sure, like Rick was saying, the powers of 10, as you go out into different levels, there has to be some integration of the story throughout the way. They cannot be isolated. Otherwise, it doesn't quite work out, right? Each area is kind of siloed in itself.
Mhm.
So integration from one visualization to another type of visualization is really going to be the key in the story from beginning to end.
So,
Yeah.
so like the
Yeah.
transitions, right? Kind of when make sure it's all tied together, right?
Before you guys got on, we were talking about the idea of integration, but we were talking about stages of life. And so if you were to start with the first one, which is dependence versus independence, or one trust versus non-trust, those are fundamental psychological life challenges. And the last one is ego integration versus despair, which is what kind of a race that I'd run as I was 80, because I'm 80, going to be 83 next month. And so started talking about, well, what's it like? You know, and I'm talking about, well, I'm doing a lot of transitioning out of what I thought who I was. But more importantly, the point I'm making is that there's a background thrown up against the idea of stages. And what I'm hearing you say, I thought I heard you say anyway, Dennis, that you were intimating that there were things that move that allow you to give the story a sense of motion. I didn't say it right.
Yes, that is correct. In a way, that is correct. This whole system too also provides a framework for people as they move throughout their life. Like you're saying, when you're starting as a junior person or a middle manager or a senior person or an executive, if you have a visualization system that's all kind of connected, it also provides a little framework for them too, to say, hey, when you get into this position, here are the things that you should be looking at, and here are the information that's coming to you to also show you that you are no longer supposed to be doing the work previously. This is what you should be concentrating on.
Yes.
So it also provides a little bit of a framework for people who are moving into new positions or new chapters of their life.
So those new positions are positions that are held up against the story of evolution, which is natural for all, not necessarily idiosyncratically the same, but
correct.
But so we all get through the question of, trust versus non-trust.
Yes, absolutely.
So if we take a step back, what I see is there's basically three components here. There's a technical idea. In your case, Dennis, you're working with like mechanical engineering type of stuff. Rick, you also gave an example from NIWIC, which is more like cyber, electronic, virtual type of technology. And Drea, what you're talking about is the technical aspects of a psychological change. Yeah, psychological theory or psychological model.
Yeah, exactly.
So all three of those I see as the same. They're technical models that then Rick is now looking at, and I see it as twofold. And it was you got into storytelling. I was thinking that there's really twofold. There's the visualization and there's the storytelling. Rick, I'm kind of interested, kind of two things. One is how much of it seems like those are almost intertwined, so you have to have both. But I'm curious if you have thoughts on how much of this that we're talking about is storytelling in and of itself versus the visualization that goes along with visualizing that story. And then I'm curious, just from all your background and history that you've talked about in your work experience, what are some of those key tools and methods that you're using to do this, as you say, rapidly? Because that, I think, is one of the key things is, with enough budget and time, you can make anything look really cool and tell a cool story, just like these big, $100 million budget movies. But what we're talking about is pace of work, where we're trying to go fast and, hey, we're working on this design and then we got to present it. Or like this, we've got this model that we want to try to present. I'm just curious what some of those tools are.
Well, let me go back to when, to the RCV, Rapid Collaborative Visualization Framework that Dennis and I developed.
Yeah.
And it's important to think about visualization as not just something that you do sort of once. It's not sort of you do after months of research, or when you have a final presentation, or you have the press or a bunch of senators walking through, that you create this visualization, you stop down work and you create a visualization. Rapid collaborative visualization encourages teams to create visualizations early and often and inexpensively, and those are the guidelines. So it's not that you're creating like an epic thing right off the bat. The idea is that you start early. Could start with a sketch. It could start with a photo of a whiteboard talk that you did. It could start with a very crude storyboard, maybe with an animation output from one of your CAD programs, if you have that. What we're saying is that visualization needs to start, and there's no like good or bad visualization. It's visualization that you learn from, and that's important to take. So right at the beginning, you may not have a really good concept of what it's all about. Look to Hollywood. They do the same thing. They don't start with like the final frame of the movie that's released, and it goes through lots of iteration. And by creating small, low-tech, low-cost, regular deliveries of visualizations, along with reports and all of that other stuff that you also do with the project, showing someone at any point, you have something right there. You don't need to like stop down and create something. If you're delivering, say, for example, on an agile schedule, on a sprint schedule, if you're doing your visualization sprints every 2 weeks, you'll have a visualization that's no more than 2 weeks old that you could show anyone who walks in. So I think it's important, and I think Dennis may agree with this, is that it's continuous, it's ongoing, it's serious. Like it's not it's nice to have, but it's really the key to keeping your team engaged, making sure that you literally see problems that may come up down the road. But it's not this sort of epic thing that you need to hire consultants to do. The expertise may be on your team already. We don't need like a $10 million sequence from Marvel to show your idea. It can be a 2D animation. It could be a 3D animation. Whatever is possible for your team to visualize is important to do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the essence of rapid collaborative visualization in terms of technique and process. And then I think Dennis and I can also add how we feel that's going to help leaders innovate in the future.
It's fascinating what you're saying. What you didn't say, but I was working through my own mind, was that you present something which helps people solve some of their own dilemmas.
Correct.
Right. Well, the good thing about the RCV process is that you always have something to see and respond to. You're not responding to a sort of amorphous set of PowerPoint slides. You're not responding to a report. You're actually sort of talking about something. And
yes,
that's really important. Yep. Even if it's just sort of not anywhere near what the final result will be, the fact that you have something specific to talk about is incredibly important. Yeah. We feel in keeping costs low, keeping risks low, keeping teams engaged, keeping the brass and people who are funding you involved and excited about what you're doing. So did that answer your question? Or?
Yeah, it did. Both of you have been incredibly clear and stimulating from my point of view about what we do and how it might interface with what you do. I'm almost sure that if you were to translate some of the problems you have in your business, whether it's selling the products that you might see or facilitate for somebody else, because those are human dilemmas that you have on a regular basis, or just going through, when I think about the numbers, coaching situations that we find ourselves in. For example, do you tell or do you ask? Do you tell or do you show?
You show.
Yeah. And when do you show versus when you ask? And because the stages might be very different depending upon the competence they bring at that moment in instant in time. So those kinds of things are what we deal with on a regular basis. And people talk about coaching. Well, if people had a way of understanding some of the things that the dilemmas themselves that they could bring to it, and a model that would be able to free up the way people think enough, because people don't change in the systems. We're sometimes they're frozen in time, and they don't want to change. Somebody called me up and said, "Listen, I got a problem for you, Drea. I want you to fix this person." I said, "Fix this person? What the hell does that mean?" And he said, "Well, he alienates all of his colleagues, hate to work with him. And he just took over a unit that's got 12 people, and 7 out of the 12 just resigned." And so when I'm talking to this guy, he knows exactly he's doing, and he doesn't have any choice at all. He doesn't want to change. Well, why don't you want to change? What's going on underneath? That's a human problem that we would be stuck with. Now, where would you start? And I grant you, I'm not asking you to do that, but what I'm really asking you to say is that we're dealing with some problems that you guys could really bring to life. And I mean, literally bring to life in what you do on a regular basis that causes change in the mindset, or at least flexibility in the sense of who I am.
It's great that you brought that up, because when I was building a brand new facility for Northrop, I was tasked with creating a more high-tech facility that integrated more systems together than the ones that were built in the 80s, right? And so that means integrating new technologies, digital signage, visualization systems, and so on and so forth. And there was a lot of cultural pushback from people who are just very comfortable with the way that they've been doing business, even though it doesn't make sense from a corporate standpoint. But for them, it works, and we don't want to change. So one of the things that I always ask them, and I always say, okay, who here lives in Orange County, 35, 40 miles away, right? And I would say like half the people would raise their hand. And I asked them, I go, do you walk to work? I'm like, well, no. Do you ride a bicycle? No. I go, why not? Well, it takes too long. It's not efficient. I go, that's what we're trying to do here. Instead of you having to walk 500 or 1,000 feet to complete one task, we're co-locating, integrating everything so you have all the information within 10 feet radius of you. We're not eliminating the job. We're making your job more efficient so that you're not as upset at the end of the day that you can't find something, you don't have the information, or it's just too difficult and frustrating for you to do something. And then they get it at that point. And it's like, one of the biggest things that I've seen is that the outside world is moving in a visualization world. But as soon as they walk inside the corporate world, nothing outside exists. Anything out there that you've done, that you use, your phone is all visualization. Nothing exists. So they go right back to paper. Yeah. And that's one of the cultural barriers that I'm trying to break down. It's like, no. We live in the same world, right? And things that have been developed outside do not need to be recreated inside. We just need to modify it for whatever security reasons or whatever is required for that company. And that's what we need to do to really at least make the first step to change and kind of create a new culture within the organization.
Yep. In fact, one of the things that if I said to you, if you want to make change and you realize that people live in or work in a culture, what are some of the aspects of that culture that you need to examine? Because people who work in organizations are constantly making appraisals of that environment over and over and over again, not just cognitive concepts, evaluations or appraisals, but emotional. And guess what comes first? And those emotions are markers for the acceptance of whatever cognitive ideas you're going to try to bring on. What are some of the factors? They look at the amount of autonomy. They look at the amount of choices they can make about the decisions they make. the interest in it, my passion for it, the meaning of it, whole series of things that enter into what you mean that environment is really creating in front of you that influences people's uptake. And how could you represent that visually and auditorily and story-wise that would enable you to, because we know those things, but we can't get executives to understand those underlying points of value of evaluation that influence people's culture response or response to the culture.
That's a fantastic point, and I have a great example for you. Not everybody likes to change, like you were saying, but when I was working on this brand new facility that affected pretty much most of the campus, a lot of executives on board, including the president, and so I had to convince all levels of management and technicians down to janitors to say, hey, this facility is going to work for everybody at every single level. So I sat down, and this is where, Rick and I kind of chatted a little bit about this, is that what is important to each person?
Yes.
Right? And make sure that it's integrated. So from an executive standpoint, we pitched to them and said, okay, this is going to be a lower cost system. And the cost that we do spend, you can recoup it by not having to have so many meetings, not having to go look for hardware, not missing things. So we appeal to their not having meetings, their financial sense, right? And improvement of customer perception of your organization. To say, hey, you're high tech. Look, I can see where my team is at immediately versus having to call meetings and so on. So we try to appeal to each group of what's important to them, but we have to make sure that what we give each group ultimately connects together into an overall story.
Connectivity. That's a good example, Dennis, of what we're faced with and how your thinking could be helpful to people that we're doing, HR people, for example,
right.
Because HR people are they're the guardians, quote, of the of the systems, the way people what people are given to appraise, what environmental factors that they take in. Yeah.
So we're running up. It's already after 11. I don't want to go too much longer, but there was one, I guess, to kind of wrap things up and take it further. I thought there was one thing that I thought would be very helpful, at least for our podcast viewers. If you guys, either of you, have specific, kind of tangible things that people can do right now to start better visualizing, doing some of this storyboarding and visualizing, what are some of those key tools that you use? What are some that maybe people can start doing now just to kind of improve what they're doing? And then we can kind of wrap with a joke from there.
So I'll take that one. So I would say start now. Start with what you know and what tools and expertise you have. Keep a record of your visualization as it changes over the course of your project or your process. That enables you to always go back to a previous version and say, you know what? Maybe we should spin off another visualization based off of this. And again, these aren't sort of 6-month, $1 million things. This is like, a visualization can take 20 to 40 hours, like an animation. And then it may take a couple hours a week to sort of update and tweak it. Mm-hmm. So I would say start now on a napkin. If you can do if you can do an animation, great, but just keep doing it and keep iterating. Dennis and I came up with the idea that innovation is kind of vague. Innovation kind of means making concepts into capability, let's say. Okay, well, that's still pretty vague. So what are the aspects of innovation that we think are the key drivers of innovation? To us, it's interaction. The team talking, going to conferences, emails. Could be mini presentations, hallway meetings, all of that. There's interaction. There's ideation. it's like, oh, this interaction makes me think of something else, and this makes me think of something else. So it's interaction, ideation, and then the last thing is iteration. We think those are the three key drivers to innovation. And iteration, of course, is making an inversion, and then making an inversion, and then making an inversion.
What was the first one again?
Interaction.
Interaction. Ideation.
And iteration.
And iteration.
So we think the rapid collaborative visualization RCV approach of sort of low-cost, continuous visualizations over the course of a project is a potential answer for that, and addresses a lot of problems, risks, issues. In fact, Dennis and I are actually sort of transforming the RCV framework into a more accessible format. So we're writing a book called Innovation Viz, based on RCV, with practical implementation that people can start now. I mean, right after listening to this podcast, you can get a sheet of paper and a pencil and make what you think is a diagram of what's going to happen, what may come in the future, and that's your first visualization. And then you iterate, and then you interact, and then you ideate, and then you interact, you ideate, all of this stuff together through the course of the project. So yes, do your PowerPoints. Yes, do your reports. Yes, do your federally mandated deliverables, and do visualization.
Got it.
So that you always have something for your team to talk about, to interact with. Any stakeholders that come in, hey, this is what we're doing. We don't give them a 2-hour PowerPoint or a 3-hour read of a report. We give them a 30-second animation or a 3-minute mini film or anything something like that.
Yep.
So that I think is sort of where we're going in the future with visualization.
To drive home the point of what Rick was saying, that there's a lot of tools that people are using right now that have some capability for visualization.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these software companies realize it, and they're starting to build that in. So they should look at what tools they're currently using now, and they can get started immediately, like Rick was saying. And I'll give you one further example of how simplistic it could be. I was down at Kennedy Space Center for work, and we scheduled a 4.5-hour meeting to discuss operations of who goes first and what happens at each of the steps. And one of the engineers, NASA engineers, came back and says, you know what, I did a really quick animation, bare bones, almost like stick figure, very, very simplistic. And he showed us in a video what happens first, who goes next, and so on and so forth. So 4.5-hour meeting ended up being 26 minutes.
That's awesome.
Because everybody got it.
When you say animations, like even stick figures, what do you mean by that? How what software or what capabilities are you using that I could make an animation myself? What do you mean?
I'm generally talking about when I say animation, I mean sort of like wireframes of objects, turntables. This is for objects as opposed to concepts. Concepts might be may take maybe another approach.
Mm-hmm.
But this could be Blender. This could be Maya. This could be, I think SketchUp might have an animation. So it's whatever tool you're already using may already have an animation.
I use PowerPoint because I have to, and I use the morph transition in PowerPoint, and that helps kind of bring some.
Yeah, you can do that thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You can do, my daughter likes to draw, and she has all these applications on her iPad that allows you to do animation that you just downloads, So pretty much anybody can do this.
Especially now with some AI tools where you can, if you need a talking head that is the commander or is the operator or is the adversary, you can generate that without having to get into a lot of modeling and sort of classic visual effects stuff. For me, classical visual effects has become a commodity. It's not really as innovative as it once was. It still is in some cases, but I think the majority of it is like, okay, we want to replace a background. We want to add an effect, a sparkly effect here. We want to add water. It's sort of like, it can be done. And a lot of it now can be done with AI, with generative AI.
Yeah.
So whatever you may need, you either may have it already in your tool set, or as maybe an enhancement of your tool set, or it can be done with AI, and that's going to continue to increase. So to use tools that we've been using since like the Industrial Revolution, flip charts, that's PowerPoint, emails, that's Telegram or telephone or teletype. Gantt charts were first came out in like the 1905, 1910 era. We're still using digital versions of like Industrial Revolution tools to innovate. And to us, that seems like a not very effective way of innovating faster.
So you mentioned Blender. I was just looking it up on my phone. It looks like a pretty powerful program. Is that something that a layperson can just pick up and make some simple stick figure animation type stuff, or?
Well, it depends on the person's sort of expertise and comfortableness with it. There are other ones. I don't know their names, but there are like perhaps simpler ways of doing that. Blender is open source, so it's literally no cost to use it. It's just you load it and you get started and you go online with tutorials.
And SketchUp is a very easy one too.
What's that?
SketchUp.
Yeah. So these are either free or low cost tools also. So you don't need to bring in a consultant and talk with them for 3 months and then have them go away for 3 months. And then, it's so a year later, you're sort of working on your project. It's like you're working on it as you do your project. You're innovating your workflow as you're delivering innovation to your customer. So you're always iterating, interacting, and ideating.
Yeah. One of the keys that Rick and I bring, to this is that we're crafting a story for all levels of an organization, right? So that everybody's on the same page with one vision.
Yeah. It's all about communication. I mean, one of the most challenging things and most important things in an organization. So, no, I love it. This is all great stuff. I think we could keep talking for hours about this stuff and digging in more and more. So maybe we'll have to have you guys back on and we can talk more technically about some of the stuff and maybe some case studies.
If you got a book coming out, absolutely. Always, bring you back on and talk about your book and keep going. I agree. Right. We can keep going. I'm really fascinated by what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for coming on. But I guess this is a joke time. This is my favorite part.
Did you guys happen to have any good jokes? We like to finish with a good or bad dad joke or any kind of joke.
They're all bad.
Well, one I always tell people who are sort of in Los Angeles, although you're not in Los Angeles, this may still apply. In Los Angeles, if you're 1 in a million, there are 10 of you.
Nice. If you're 1 in a million, there's 10 of you.
That's true.
Yeah. So I guess here it's about 6 of us?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. I don't know who the other 3
are. Jeez.
Yeah. Dennis, what about you? Any good jokes or?
No, nothing that comes off the top of my mind. I'm sure there probably were a couple, since we have kids.
Yeah, right. You got to step out of that engineer side. Think like a dad.
Exactly.
Well, one of my favorite engineer jokes is, how do you tell the extroverted engineer from the rest? He's the one looking at your shoes.
That's good.
There you go.
That's good.
No, that's actually true, though.
How do you tell the
extroverted engineer from the rest of the engineers? He's the one looking at your shoes. Nice. As Jerry looks down at his own shoes.
Hey. I got Skechers. What do you got?
I got me some Ace, actually.
I was going to say thank you very much for the opportunity to present this. In a way, Dennis and I also see this as an opportunity for ourselves to interact, to ideate, and to iterate. So based on this conversation, we've already iterated our conception of rapid collaborative visualization. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of talking this way is a huge help to us.
it's for me, it's just a super pleasure to get all kinds of walks of life coming out here talking about the great things they're doing. And this last hour has been great. I mean, the connections we were able to make between the work that we do and what you guys do has been fantastic. So again, thank you both for coming on and taking the time to
seriously,
do this.
yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Congrats! You made it to the end of the episode. Thanks for tuning in. We genuinely hope that you found value in our conversation. If you liked it, please click that like button below and subscribe so that you can stay up to date on our current episodes. And if you didn't like it, you can click the dislike button, but make sure you click it twice. We're eager to hear from you, whether it's your thoughts, questions, topic ideas, or if you're interested in our leadership training and consulting support. Leave us a comment below or reach out to us directly at info@intrinsicfirst.com. We're open to any and all feedback. Thanks again for joining us. We look forward to having you back for more insightful leadership discussion. Until next time.